It tells the story of a simple young man named Tsukumo Yamada, who is an unremarkable college student. His life is quite ordinary and simple, but there is something that always makes his life more colorful when he goes home. At that time, when Tsukumo was preparing to go home, he accidentally ran into a solitary, beautiful woman who was quite famous on campus named Mao Yoshida. Yoshida in the university environment is famous for rumors that made her nicknamed the Mermaid Princess. While the boys are in an uproar, Tsukumo is secretly summoned by Yoshida. When they are alone, Yoshida seems quite aggressive in pressing Tsukumo. In fact, Tsukumo and Yoshida have a very close and intense intimate relationship. Anyone who sees them when they are alone will definitely think that the two of them are lovers. However, Tsukumo is unable to grasp the romantic distance between them because Yoshida is too expressionless. That is why Tsukumo has a sweet but bittersweet college life. His life is indeed more colorful when he is with Yoshida, but Tsukumo must be able to conquer the challenge first. The challenge is to change the status of friends to lovers. It had been a year and a half since Tsukumo began his life as a student at a university. Tsukumo also found his first girlfriend in a long time. At least that was what he thought, although honestly, they still agreed that their relationship was just friendship. One day on campus, class ended on schedule. Tsukumo's friend called him Yamada. They asked him to go to karaoke. The young man seemed confused about how to answer until his friend accidentally blocked the way of a girl who was also in the same department as them. The girl was Mao Yoshida. Without anyone realizing, Yoshida and Tsukumo exchanged glances. Tsukumo's friends looked blushed, feeling so happy because it was the first time he heard Yoshida talk to him. However, his other friends denied it. Yoshida's words just now could not be categorized as chatting. Even so, the young man still felt happy. The last time he asked Yoshida to hang out together, all he got was ignoring and a look that indicated a strong rejection. Not surprisingly, even for the others, the same thing happened. They both hadn't heard the mermaid princess's voice for a long time. Yoshida Mao is a second-year student at N University, majoring in literature. Yoshida is known to be an extreme loner and very quiet. The girl received many invitations from young men on campus, but none of them were accepted. All of them were rejected. Because of her character and attitude, Yoshida Mao earned the nickname as a mermaid princess. Because of that, many are curious whether Yoshida has a boyfriend, because every man who expressed his feelings for Yoshida always got rejected. Maybe it is true that Yoshida has someone out there. When the conversation about Yoshida continued, Tsukumo just kept quiet and looked uncomfortable. His friends returned to the original topic. They wanted to know what Tsukumo would do with their invitation to karaoke. Tsukumo refused, saying he still had to write his report soon. Therefore, his friends couldn't force him anymore because the report submission deadline was soon over. However, what Tsukumo said he would do was honestly just an excuse. He had a secret that he kept and hid from everyone. That secret was Tsukumo's relationship with Yoshida. Tsukumo soon met Yoshida, but from that meeting, it was clear that Yoshida had a greater desire than Tsukumo. Without further ado, in that cramped space, Yoshida devoured Tsukumo's lips. Tsukumo was worried that someone would catch them red-handed, but in Yoshida's eyes, Tsukumo seemed more unable to hold himself back. Yoshida knew that Tsukumo would honestly be happy. The young man even refused his friend's invitation to hang out at karaoke. Tsukumo couldn't help it. How could he stand it when Yoshida was staring at him with such hopeful eyes? Both of them seemed equally consumed by desire, but Yoshida wanted Tsukumo to be honest and tell them what he wanted them to do. Tsukumo almost said it, but the young man froze when he heard the voices of several people approaching. Yoshida called out to him, closing the distance between them. From that position, two strangers passing by would only see the back of a man whose identity was unknown, making out with a girl whose identity was also unknown. With such a situation, the two strangers certainly felt uncomfortable, but in the end they decided to pretend not to see anything. After the disturbance left, Tsukumo asked Yoshida what was really wrong. The girl then replied that she just didn't want her face to be seen by others. That's why she buried her face in Tsukumo's arms. Yoshida turned around. She hurried home and said she would come to Tsukumo's place tonight at 7. Tsukumo tried to stop the girl because he hadn't had time to finish answering Yoshida's question earlier. But the girl had already ended Tsukumo's answer time. Tsukumo looked surprised and disappointed. His cheeks were flushed, but his disappointed expression could not be hidden. Yoshida, who saw this, then returned and kissed Tsukumo's cheek, who looked down lethargic. Tsukumo was shocked again and didn't even have time to react. Yoshida again said that what they had postponed would be continued tonight. Yoshida now really went home, leaving Tsukumo still stunned with blushing cheeks. He had been in this relationship with Yoshida for 4 months. He was always being led around like that. Nevertheless, Tsukumo was still happy. Remembering that Yoshida would be coming home at 7 o'clock, Tsukumo hurried home to tidy up his living space. At 7 o'clock sharp, Yoshida arrived at Tsukumo's apartment. The two initially watched a streaming video together before finally deciding to start their previously postponed desire. One by one, Yoshida's clothes began to be unbuttoned, but the girl asked for a moment. She wanted to leave at least one comment in the chat column before her favorite streamer's broadcast ended. Tsukumo allowed it. The young man waited obediently. Seeing Yoshida's attitude, Tsukumo could tell that the girl really liked Komari-chan, the game streamer they had just watched together. Yoshida confirmed that suspicion. Yoshida had even supported Komari-chan since the streamer first made her debut. Tsukumo tried to understand Yoshida's pleasure. Yoshida asked if the young man didn't like Komari-chan, but that wasn't the reason. What bothered Tsukumo a little was that they themselves were listening to Komari-chan's stream while doing that kind of thing. However, because the stream had finished and Yoshida had also managed to leave a comment, Tsukumo wanted to continue what had been postponed the second time. However, this time Yoshida also stalled again. The girl wanted to clean herself first before starting again. Tsukumo clearly can't stop Yoshida's wishes, but with the girl's attitude of delaying him several times, he thinks maybe Yoshida isn't in the mood to do it. Yoshida has stayed over at his place many times now, but he still doesn't really understand what Yoshida is thinking. Normally, Yoshida is the proactive one, but when Tsukumo is the one initiating, Yoshida avoids him. To begin with, he doesn't really know much about Yoshida. He has never seen her talking to anyone other than him. Yoshida won't tell him where she is from or about her family. Why is Yoshida even interested in someone like Tsukumo? But since they are doing that kind of thing, Tsukumo begins to think it should be okay if he loves Yoshida. However, before Tsukumo knows and realizes his feelings, he is already in that kind of relationship. They have never even once said, "I love you" to each other. From that long thought, Tsukumo begins to think that he should express his feelings properly to Yoshida. Yoshida emerged from the bathroom with only a towel covering her still damp body. After her shower, the girl was much more proactive than before. Yoshida was completely in heat. At that point, Tsukumo had no choice but to obey Yoshida's orders until she was satisfied. Tsukumo had realized this. When Yoshida was turned on, her sadistic side came out. The two seemed to be enjoying the bond they were strengthening with that kind of thing, even though their relationship was still ambiguous. The chemistry seemed very compatible. Although it felt so hot it was almost burning inside Yoshida, Tsukumo was okay with it. He could hear her heartbeat through their skin pressed together. Yoshida was losing her composure to tease Tsukumo. The room was filled only with the sound of their breathing and the pounding of their hips. When passion was at its peak, it was time to let go. Tsukumo's wish had been fulfilled. Yoshida decided to stay the night at Tsukumo's place. The next day she had morning classes, and Tsukumo's place was considered closer to the university, which was good for her. After a short break, one by one they returned to the bathroom to clean themselves. The night was still long. The two of them were lying down on the same bed, about to sleep. Tsukumo had already decided to express his feelings. The young man felt quite nervous about starting a serious conversation. He tried to speak as clearly as possible. He knew it might be too late after what they had been through together. However, Tsukumo still wanted to do it properly. His nervousness could no longer be contained. Tsukumo got up from his sleep and told Yoshida that he loved her. Tsukumo promised that he would cherish Yoshida as his girlfriend. When Tsukumo wanted to say that from now on they were a couple, Yoshida interrupted him by asking if perhaps Tsukumo had misunderstood something. Tsukumo was silent, surprised, and not understanding. Yoshida got up too to clarify her words so that Tsukumo could understand. The girl said that for her, Tsukumo was just a friend. From Yoshida's statement, Tsukumo confirmed his suspicions. He still didn't really understand what Yoshida was thinking. Time has passed since that night's conversation. Tsukumo still kept thinking about Yoshida's words that considered him only as a friend. Tsukumo tried to understand it, but no matter how he thought about it, various questions kept coming up that rejected that understanding. Would someone easily have a relationship with someone who was considered only a friend? Even in the case of Tsukumo and Yoshida, they had gone through 4 months since his first time with Yoshida. So many speculations Tsukumo thought about until he finally concluded that maybe their relationship was what is usually called friends with benefits. With that thought, Tsukumo then wondered if maybe Yoshida had a real lover other than Tsukumo. But from what he had seen, there doesn't seem to be anyone like that. He had thought that maybe Yoshida's real lover was outside of campus, but that was quite impossible because Yoshida even stayed over at Tsukumo's place half the week. Tsukumo continued to think about all the possibilities until he didn't realize the class was over. The young man was so surprised when his friends asked him to go out to eat together. As they were about to eat, the 3 of them chatted. Tsukumo no longer had classes that afternoon. Once again, the 3 of them ran into Yoshida. Tsukumo's 2 friends were still as before, captivated by Yoshida's charm. Tsukumo also could only stare. Yoshida had never spoken to Tsukumo at university. The girl rarely even made eye contact with him. Yoshida had once told Tsukumo that she didn't want other people to know about their relationship. This was now a serious concern for Tsukumo. Yoshida's reluctance to be seen knowing Tsukumo made Tsukumo think Yoshida really had someone else she liked. Suddenly, Tsukumo's phone received a message notification. The incoming message was from Yoshida, asking if Tsukumo was free that afternoon. The girl invited Tsukumo to meet at the library at 2 in the afternoon. Reading the message made Tsukumo reflexively smile excitedly. He then realized that he shouldn't be easily excited by such things. He was the kind of person who gets excited over something like that. The kind of person who feels fulfilled just by being desired by Yoshida. Tsukumo's party said that was enough. Tsukumo should be satisfied with his current situation rather than poking around and getting hurt. However, even so, the young man also still wanted to know what Tsukumo really was to Yoshida. Tsukumo went to the library and met Yoshida. He wanted to know what Yoshida was looking for in the library that time. At that time, Ellery Queen. Since no one else was borrowing, Yoshida felt she could pick whatever she wanted. Tsukumo responded happily. The young man still remembered that he had also read several books from the author Yoshida had just mentioned because someone had recommended them to him. Yoshida, who heard the young man's words, then spontaneously looked back in the direction the young man was. Apparently, Yoshida thought that Tsukumo in his mind thought that Yoshida now had an interest in reading books other than manga. Tsukumo was then shocked and confused and immediately denied Yoshida's accusation. In the end, Tsukumo admitted that he did think so a little. Yoshida didn't want to be underestimated. The girl was quite a bookworm, and the library facilitated her reading books without having to pay. Yoshida was self-aware that she didn't have much money, so she had no choice but to use whatever facilities she could. Yoshida then realized and asked why Tsukumo kept following her. Tsukumo didn't know what to do because he didn't really have anything to borrow from the library. Yoshida reiterated that she didn't want anyone to see the 2 of them together at the university. Tsukumo then felt confused. If that was the case, then why did the girl ask him to come? Yoshida then replied that she just wanted to kill time somewhere random. Tsukumo then obeyed Yoshida's words and went to the other side of the library. However, he also thought that if it was really like that, Yoshida wouldn't have to ask to meet at the library. Yoshida could have just told him to wait until she was done. Tsukumo saw Yoshida's way and attitude were the same as usual. In his mind, Yoshida probably didn't think about what had happened the previous day. However, being in the library surrounded by books reminded Tsukumo of the first time he met Yoshida. Not the first time they met, but perhaps more accurately, the first time he became aware of Yoshida. It was the bookstore in front of the station. Flashback to 5 months ago. At that time, Tsukumo was in a bookstore in front of the station looking for a book. There was a book he wanted, but when he found it, it seemed to be targeted by a girl who was none other than Yoshida. Seeing Yoshida's appearance at that time, Tsukumo recognized her as a girl in the same class as him, although he didn't remember her name. Tsukumo chose to give the book he wanted to the girl. He could still buy the book the next day. The girl then thanked Tsukumo. Tsukumo was quite surprised when the girl knew his name. Although it was not strange for them to know each other's names because they were both in the same class. Seeing their similar taste in manga made Tsukumo interested enough to talk to the girl. The next day at university, the girl from yesterday came with a manga and gave it to Tsukumo. The young man was surprised. The girl asked if Tsukumo had bought the manga. No answer was given by Tsukumo to the girl's question. Tsukumo thought about buying the manga when he got home. The girl then gave the manga, saying that she had bought another copy. Tsukumo was about to refuse because he knew the bookstore only had one copy yesterday. The girl still gave it to him. Tsukumo was about to pay, but the girl left. There was no need for him to pay. Tsukumo tried to stop the girl. If the girl really didn't want to accept his money, then Tsukumo would be happy to treat her to lunch at the cafeteria. The young man was also enthusiastic enough to talk about the manga with the girl as long as he had the chance, because no one else around him read the manga like him. The girl accepted Tsukumo's invitation. That was the beginning of Tsukumo's relationship with Yoshida. 5 months have passed since then. When they started talking, he was surprised at how much they had in common. The two continued to spend time together again and again. They even went so far as to exchange feelings for each other. From that, Tsukumo assumed Yoshida felt the same way. Suddenly, his confused thoughts drifted to a book titled Guardian of Fairy. Tsukumo remembered that the book would soon be getting an anime adaptation. He thought Yoshida would definitely like the book. Tsukumo reached for the book, just like Yoshida. The events of 5 months ago were repeating themselves. Yoshida asked Tsukumo if he wanted to borrow the book. Tsukumo immediately replied no. Yoshida could take it. Yoshida then took the book. Tsukumo then tried to remind Yoshida that what they were experiencing at that moment was their first way of interacting. It was such a coincidence that Tsukumo even thought it might be fate. However, the talk of fate was immediately denied by Yoshida. Tsukumo was stunned in disbelief. He felt that Yoshida now really didn't feel the same bond with him. Tsukumo's smile then became awkward. Yoshida, who saw Tsukumo's facial expression, suddenly grabbed the young man's hand, leading him away to a corner away from people's sight. Yoshida took the young man to the restroom. Tsukumo nervously asked if they were going to do it there. Yoshida didn't budge. She took out a safety and asked Tsukumo to take off his pants. They did that kind of thing again in the library restroom. Yoshida seemed to have trouble holding back her voice, even though Tsukumo had gently reminded her several times. Sometimes, Yoshida gets turned on like that. At times like that, somewhere no one is around. Tsukumo just lets Yoshida do as she pleases until she is satisfied. Yoshida, struggling to hold back her voice, then asked Tsukumo to silence her with a kiss. Tsukumo never thought about that before, but now he just got curious. Was she just being used by Yoshida? A convenient friend with benefits to talk about hobbies with. The sound of several people entering the restroom area was heard. Yoshida then devoured Tsukumo's lips to muffle her own voice. The two were so intense. It continued like that until the people outside left because their business in the restroom was finished. When there was no one else, the two began to prepare to release their desires. Yoshida hugged Tsukumo tightly, and the young man hugged Yoshida. Tsukumo realized. It seems Yoshida isn't satisfied with only one orgasm. They continued kissing for about 10 minutes after that. Tsukumo had to leave immediately because he had something to do. Until the end, Tsukumo still couldn't ask Yoshida about what the girl was really thinking. That day Yoshida went home to her apartment alone. Tsukumo was quite surprised when Yoshida didn't go to his place. Yoshida told Tsukumo that she had ordered a game. She would buy it and go home. Although Yoshida had said that her finances were not good enough, the girl also understood the concept of saving, so she set aside some of her money and saved to buy something she wanted, which at that time was a game. Tsukumo was quite surprised. He asked if Yoshida wanted Tsukumo to accompany her, but Yoshida refused. The girl wanted to get home quickly and play her new game. Even though he had been told that Yoshida wanted to get the game she wanted, Tsukumo still had the suspicion that Yoshida might be rushing to meet her real lover. Tsukumo let out a long sigh. He hated his thoughts like that. Yoshida suddenly called Tsukumo. The girl hugged Tsukumo from behind while whispering that she only did that kind of thing with Tsukumo alone. Immediately after saying that, Yoshida left for her destination. Tsukumo could only turn around to see the back of the girl, who had just hugged him, getting further away. His cheeks were flushed, and his heart was beating fast. The young man really couldn't understand. Until then, Yoshida was still a mystery to Tsukumo. Since Tsukumo and Yoshida's farewell at the library, Tsukumo hadn't heard from Yoshida at all. The last time they saw each other was on Friday, and it was already Tuesday. Of course, Tsukumo couldn't help but think about Yoshida, because she usually came almost every weekend. Yoshida hadn't even replied to his messages. From the situation, It seemed like she hadn't been coming to university lately either. As far as Tsukumo could remember, that was the first time Yoshida had missed classes on campus for 2 days in a row. He started to think that maybe Yoshida had caught a cold. But on top of that, Tsukumo also thought that maybe Yoshida was spending time with her real boyfriend, but he quickly dismissed the thought. He felt like he shouldn't be thinking about such stupid things. Tsukumo then remembered that Yoshida only did that kind of thing with him. He tried to believe Yoshida's words, although honestly, Tsukumo still felt worried. His worry led Tsukumo to go visit Yoshida's residence. It had been a long time since Tsukumo had last been there. Usually, Yoshida was the one who always went to Tsukumo's place. That day, Tsukumo had sent a message to Yoshida that he would come to Yoshida's house. However, there was still no response from Yoshida. Tsukumo had expected this beforehand. He was no longer surprised. Tsukumo also brought some medicine and food in case Yoshida became sick and unable to get up. Even so, Tsukumo still hoped that the girl was safe and well. Tsukumo had pressed the doorbell several times, but there was no answer. He thought Yoshida might be out of the house, but quickly dismissed the thought. After waiting for a while, there was finally an answer. The girl was quite surprised and asked what business Tsukumo had come to her house for. Tsukumo then said that Yoshida, who hadn't replied to his messages, not the girl at the university, was also quite curious. Tsukumo. Yoshida then asked what day it was. When Tsukumo answered that it was Tuesday, Yoshida opened the door. The girl's appearance looked messy, tired, and sleepy. Although messy, Tsukumo was quite relieved to see Yoshida seemed fine. Yoshida invited him in. Her room was just as messy as Yoshida's. The girl asked Tsukumo to ignore her. Yoshida was the type of girl who wasn't good at cleaning. Her room was always messy whenever Tsukumo came and stopped by. However, that day the level of mess in Yoshida's room seemed even messier than usual. Tsukumo remembered that a situation like that had happened once before. That was during summer vacation. Seeing how Yoshida was in front of him and remembering the cause of the messy situation, the cause was the same. All because of the game. Yoshida asked Tsukumo what the young man had brought. Tsukumo then replied that he had brought some medicine and food because he didn't know about Yoshida's news and condition beforehand. The young man was just being careful. The young man was very worried about Yoshida. The game that caught Yoshida's attention was the one Yoshida had mentioned earlier. Archana V. Tsukumo then asked about Yoshida's absence from campus. It wouldn't be good to be absent for too long without any news. Yoshida knew that. The girl didn't mind because she felt she was about to reach the climax in her game. Yoshida was sure she could finish the game that night. Yoshida was enthusiastic enough to show Tsukumo about the game she was playing. Tsukumo felt nostalgic seeing how Yoshida was back then. Yoshida's expression was quite difficult to predict, but that time Tsukumo could tell. The expression Yoshida showed at that time was an expression when the girl wanted to share something she really liked. Yoshida, who was usually very quiet, would become talkative only at times like that. Yoshida leaned closer to Tsukumo until he could smell her scent. He actually missed the scent of Yoshida's shampoo, but he was disappointed. The girl hadn't been touched by water for several days. Of course, Tsukumo immediately asked when Yoshida had last gone into the bathroom to take a shower. Yoshida honestly couldn't remember. She had been too busy with that game to think about it. Tsukumo then thought back. Yoshida had bought the game on Friday. It was certain that the girl had taken a shower on Friday morning. It was already Tuesday. So long had passed that Tsukumo's decision to order Yoshida to take a shower was clearly the best decision, even though Yoshida initially refused. Seeing Yoshida refuse, of course, Tsukumo said that Yoshida wasn't a child. However, Yoshida didn't think so. Her skipping class to play games could make her categorized as a child. Tsukumo was surprised. The young man accidentally put on a pitiful expression while saying that he actually really liked Yoshida's scent after a bath. Yoshida was quite surprised to see Tsukumo's expression. The girl then got up from her seat and started to go to the bathroom. Tsukumo was quite surprised by the girl's sudden change in attitude. Tsukumo lay on Yoshida's bed. A familiar manga was there, found by Tsukumo. Tsukumo smiled and felt so nostalgic. The first time Tsukumo met Yoshida was because the young man was trying to buy the new volume of that book. Tsukumo found a piece of paper tucked inside the book. Tsukumo opened the piece of paper, which turned out to be a paper containing Tsukumo's writings from his school days. On the paper it was written, "Tell me your thoughts next time we meet, Tsukumo." Before he had time to think about the writing on the piece of paper, Tsukumo was startled by Yoshida's scream in the bathroom. Of course, Tsukumo immediately came to check on the girl. Yoshida was surprised when Tsukumo entered, especially when she was not wearing any clothes at all. Tsukumo apologized for his impulsive actions. The young man thought something had happened. Yoshida didn't mind it. Tsukumo didn't need to apologize. Yoshida felt she wouldn't be embarrassed even if Tsukumo saw her without clothes. The girl was just surprised because the water temperature was still so cold when it touched her skin. Tsukumo smiled. The young man was about to go back. In his mind he believed Yoshida's words, but for himself, suddenly seeing Yoshida without clothes certainly made him embarrassed. Yoshida suddenly stopped Tsukumo's steps as he was about to leave. Yoshida wanted Tsukumo to help her bathe. Tsukumo agreed. The young man was just confused as to why he also needed to take off his clothes. The reason was simple. Yoshida's bathroom was quite small, so no matter what he did, Tsukumo was sure to get wet anyway. Yoshida invited Tsukumo to clean the girl's body until the young man was satisfied. The young man blushed but also did not hesitate to accept the girl's offer. Tsukumo's hands began to clean Yoshida's body, starting with her favorite part. Yoshida somehow felt that the touch was different from usual. Tsukumo asked Yoshida if he was doing the right thing, but she's still silent. Tsukumo wondered if his touch was lacking. Tsukumo then intended to do it a little harder. Yoshida was surprised. She then spoke, telling Tsukumo that the way he was washing her was a bit erotic. Yoshida then couldn't hold back her voice anymore. Tsukumo reminded her, but it wasn't entirely Yoshida's fault. Something of Tsukumo's was touching Yoshida's butt. The girl could feel it getting bigger and harder. Yoshida finally stepped in to give Tsukumo her service so that something of Tsukumo's could calm down because it kept touching Yoshida's backside, and it was bothering him. Tsukumo couldn't deny it. It was natural for him to be unable to hold back in such a situation. Finally, Tsukumo had released his tension. However, instead of cleaning Yoshida, it actually made the girl dirty. Of course, Tsukumo apologized for that. Yoshida asked the young man about what they would do next. Tsukumo's eyes lit up. Tsukumo asked Yoshida once again if it was okay. Yoshida understood. They usually only did it at Tsukumo's place, so that time at Yoshida's place, they didn't have protection. The girl asked if Tsukumo wanted to go to the convenience store to buy protection, but Tsukumo couldn't. He was already at his limit. Yoshida didn't mind as long as Tsukumo knew his limits. They then continued. It was something new for them because it was their first time doing that kind of thing without using protection. Yoshida was quite curious about how or what Tsukumo felt. Tsukumo continued. According to him, what he felt was better than usual. Yoshida confirmed. That time it felt better than usual because of the sense of guilt and the thrill. Realizing they were doing something wrong with the fear of Tsukumo coming inside and the pleasure of their backs pressed together. Yoshida concluded that Tsukumo was quite a pervert. Tsukumo defended himself by saying that Yoshida was not much different from him. Yoshida denied it. One round was over. Yoshida suggested they continue that kind of thing in their room. After that, they spent the whole night. Tsukumo went to a convenience store to buy some snacks and some protection. They spent the night together playing games and keeping each other warm. Until finally morning came. The game ended, taking until morning. Yoshida was quite sure that if Tsukumo hadn't come to her place, she would have been able to finish the game and have enough time to sleep. Tsukumo didn't want to be blamed at that time. He came because he was worried. Yoshida also didn't intend to blame Tsukumo. After all, spending the night playing games with friends was indeed a very enjoyable thing. The word friend continued to define their relationship. Tsukumo had had enough. He wondered if things could stay that way for a while. He felt like Yoshida's idea of friend and his idea of friend were slightly different. First, Tsukumo wanted to know more about Yoshida. That morning, Tsukumo offered to buy Yoshida food as a treat. Yoshida happily accepted. Tsukumo only remembered about the piece of paper stuck in the book. Just after university ended, he saw Yoshida off as she left, saying, "I want to sleep early today." Some time had passed. The piece of paper Tsukumo saw at Yoshida's place the other day had been on his mind ever since. Tsukumo, who kept thinking about it, then contacted his sister Michiru. There was something Tsukumo wanted her to ask. Tsukumo wanted Michiru to send Tsukumo his middle school graduation album. Tsukumo was sure Michiru knew Tsukumo's room better than their mother. The young man could even guess that Michiru was probably just hanging out there to read manga like usual. That was true. Michiru would do as Tsukumo asked as long as her brother brought her a souvenir when Tsukumo came home next time. The girl would use the souvenir as a gift. Tsukumo then agreed. Suddenly, Michiru spoke about one of the manga titles that was missing from Tsukumo's room. Shiryuden Volume 2. The girl felt that maybe her brother had lost one of the manga volumes, or maybe it had been taken to his brother's apartment. Tsukumo was shocked when he heard the title of the Shiryuden Volume 2. Michiru finally bought the missing volume because she thought the story was quite interesting. Tsukumo chose to hang up after leaving his request to his sister. Tsukumo was quite confused. There was an image of a girl that appeared in his mind and the words "friend" that kept ringing in his head. The next day on campus, Tsukumo saw Yoshida that day, but he also remembered the rule they had set where they had to pretend not to know each other around the university. As a result, because of this rule, the two exchanged messages via cell phone. The two were going to meet because Yoshida wanted to borrow Tsukumo's notebook to copy material when Yoshida was absent from the previous class. Tsukumo asked what he would receive in return. Yoshida then offered her body. Naturally, Tsukumo blushed when he read the message. He replied that he didn't really like that kind of joke. Yoshida then asked directly if Tsukumo didn't like her offer. Tsukumo was surprised. His face was embarrassed and flushed red. His friend greeted him from a distance. The young man even noticed that Tsukumo's face was red. His friend wanted to make sure that Tsukumo didn't have a fever. Tsukumo replied that he was fine. It wasn't clear whether it was an answer to his friend or Yoshida's question just now. Tsukumo and Yoshida then parted ways on campus. That night, Yoshida had given Tsukumo her body as a reward. The girl wore the shirt she had just to cover her body. She asked Tsukumo if he had anything on his mind all day. Yoshida saw Tsukumo seem distracted by something she didn't know. It was as if his mind was elsewhere. Tsukumo himself had just realized it. Yoshida then asked what Tsukumo was going to do. Was he going to sleep? The answer was yes. When the two were lying in the same bed, Tsukumo hesitated a little, but finally decided to ask Yoshida. He wanted to know what made Yoshida like Shiryuden manga. Yoshida couldn't understand why the young man asked about it so suddenly. Tsukumo asked because he remembered his notes on a piece of paper that he found tucked into Shiryuden Manga Volume 2 in Yoshida's apartment. Tsukumo, feeling uncomfortable, then put off his question just now. Suddenly Yoshida got up from bed. Tsukumo was startled by the sudden movement. The girl suddenly remembered that she had to watch a drama because the conversation earlier had reminded her. Both of them were now awake. Tsukumo asked if the girl really wouldn't sleep. Yoshida refused because she felt she had to watch the drama. Tsukumo then reminded her that it was already 2 in the morning. They also had morning classes the next morning. Yoshida unmoved. The girl felt very curious and reluctant to miss the continuation of the drama she was waiting for. Tsukumo just smiled and reminded Yoshida not to forget to set an alarm. Tsukumo looked at Yoshida, who seemed enthusiastic. The young man then realized that he was used to being led around by Yoshida. But why did that conversation remind her of a drama? Tsukumo was curious enough to know the reason behind it. The more Tsukumo thought about Yoshida, the more he wanted to know more about her. Suddenly, Yoshida asked Tsukumo if the drama Yoshida was watching was similar to Shiryuden. Tsukumo didn't realize it. In that case, Yoshida wasn't referring to the similarity of genres, but they're both stories about reclaiming a lost part of oneself. Whether it's a part of your body or memory, the theme is the same. Finally, Tsukumo could understand Yoshida's perspective just now. Yoshida then asked again if Tsukumo had ever read Plato's Symposium. Tsukumo had never read it. The young man wanted to know if there was a connection to the drama. Yoshida almost gave an answer, but the girl chose to cancel her action. Yoshida avoided him and chose to sleep. The two then lay back down and rested for the rest of the night. When they had lain down and closed their eyes, Yoshida suddenly spoke. She wanted to answer Tsukumo's question earlier. That Shiryuden was a special manga for Yoshida. The manga was like proof that Yoshida had found a place to belong. Back then, Yoshida felt like she was empty, like she had nothing. Tsukumo woke up, wanting to say that it wasn't true, but Yoshida reassured him. What she said about her having nothing was in the past, not at that time. The situation was different now. 2 days passed since that night. Suddenly, Tsukumo woke up from a dream in the past. The dream contained memories of his interaction with a girl he had forgotten. When he woke up, Tsukumo felt nostalgic. That morning, Tsukumo had received a package from Michiru containing the items. Tsukumo had asked him to send earlier. Tsukumo brought a box of the items inside. When he entered the room, he saw Yoshida still sleeping soundly on his bed. Tsukumo had touched the girl's cheek, but Yoshida was not disturbed at all and did not even wake up. Tsukumo laughed because he found it quite funny. The young man then began to open the package. Not only the album, in fact, the mother also sent many things for her son. Tsukumo didn't look at the other items. He wanted to immediately explore the album. From the photos of dozens of students, Tsukumo seemed to be looking for one student. Tsukumo remembered that the student disappeared quickly. Tsukumo thought she transferred around May and then disappeared again during summer vacation. Even so, Tsukumo was sure there must be at least a photo of her somewhere. After searching so thoroughly, Tsukumo finally found it. He had found what he was looking for, but what he remembered was that the girl's name used to be different. Tsukumo tried to recall the name of the girl he was trying to remember. The girl's name was quite related to Tsukumo's own name. The young man finally remembered that the girl's name in his memory was Ninome. He then remembered the connection between the name and his own and said it directly at the same time as Yoshida, who had woken up without Tsukumo realizing it. If you add them up, it's exactly 100. Tsukumo then turned to the side, towards where Yoshida was. The girl smiled warmly as she said that they had finally met again. Flashback to Yoshida Mao's past. 1 month into her 3rd year of middle school, she was suddenly told they were moving. She finished preparing both physically and mentally without a hitch. She barely had any belongings or memories. Her mother asked her to hurry. She asked again if she really couldn't bring her pet dog with her. Unfortunately, her mother's answer was still no. Their future residence didn't allow pets. Her mother wanted her to worry more about herself than the puppy. She wanted her daughter to have at least one friend at her new school. She asked again if her father would feed the puppy well. Her mother then replied that the man in question was no longer her father. She no longer had anything. At her new school, the girl started her first day nervously, like any other transfer student. She introduced herself as Ninome Mao. After introducing herself, she was asked to sit in the back seat near the window. She kept her head down while the class's gazes were on her. She knew the reason for those stares. The students in her class were surely curious about why there was a new student in the middle of May. She quite hated her situation of being the center of attention. When she reached her seat, a student started talking to her. The young man seemed curious about where she came from. The name Ninome is a rare last name. The young man wanted to know if the name was common in the place where the girl lived before. The girl was quite nervous to answer. She didn't really know. Tsukumo wanted to tell her his name so she wouldn't be nervous, but her classmates immediately mocked Tsukumo, accusing him of trying to get close to the transfer student. Tsukumo was forced to silent. The girl couldn't understand what Tsukumo was doing. During rest time, many girls in her class came to Ninome Mao to chat. The girl was invited to join a club, but she didn't feel like it because she was already in her 3rd year of middle school. The girls then asked what Ninome Mao did at her old school. The girl answered nothing. Even when asked what the girl usually did at home, her answer was almost the same, nothing in particular. The girls ran out of topics. They didn't want to leave the transfer girl, so they asked her to exchange social media contacts. Unfortunately, the girl couldn't. She still didn't have a cell phone because her parents wouldn't allow it. In the end, the girls who tried to befriend Ninome Mao chose to chat with their usual friends. After school, the girl was alone until Tsukumo called her. He reiterated what they had talked about that morning. Tsukumo offered to show Ninome Mao around the school, but she declined. She was simply surprised that he could talk to her so casually. She had never spoken to a boy before, so her first experience made her a little scared. Even so, she wondered if she had done something bad. From then on, no one proactively approached her again. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Ninome Mao spent her time at school alone. Even when it was break time, she just ate her lunch at her desk. That day, she realized again that she really didn't have anything that could make other people stay by her side. She already knew that no one would pay attention to her. Her alone time passed so quickly that she didn't realize it was already quite late in the evening. The myriad of domestic chores at home had been looming over her. It was tiring because she had to go back to class first to retrieve her belongings. The classroom was already empty. The girl's eyes were fixed on a manga titled Shiryuden. The girl was quite curious. It seemed someone had accidentally left the manga behind. The girl had barely read any manga. Therefore, she tried to open a few pages and read them. As a result, the girl got carried away and spent time alone reading the manga. She didn't realize it until Tsukumo came to class to pick up his manga that he had left behind. The manga in question was the one she was reading. The girl was immediately shocked and stood up. She knew she had to apologize to Tsukumo for being so rude, but unfortunately, the girl couldn't say a single word to apologize to him. When the girl was confused about how to apologize, Tsukumo instead asked what she thought of his manga. Was the story interesting? Tsukumo waited for an honest reaction from the girl. Even though the girl had only read a few pages, she found the story in the manga quite interesting for her. Tsukumo was then enthusiastic about the girl's response just now. The girl was finally able to apologize for reading the manga without permission. Tsukumo actually didn't mind and was happy that someone could understand him. Tsukumo offered the girl that he could lend her the manga. Unfortunately, the girl had to refuse because her mother didn't like such things, saying they could have a bad influence on her. Tsukumo could understand the girl's condition. He had a feeling they would get along just from her name. The girl was confused as to why. Tsukumo then explained that it was because of the way the names Tsukumo and Ninome were written in kanji. Tsukumo and Ninome said together, if you add them up, it's exactly 100. Their conversation had to be interrupted because the clock had shown evening. The girl felt late to go home, so she rushed to pack her things so she could go home immediately. Tsukumo offered his manga with the intention of lending it to the girl. The young man said that as long as Ninome's mother didn't find it, the girl would be safe. The girl was still hesitant. Tsukumo with a smile then said that he wanted the girl to read the manga too, so they could talk about it later when she was finished reading. The girl finally accepted Tsukumo's offer. From then on, borrowing manga from Tsukumo and talking about it after school became a daily routine. At first, she couldn't really express her thoughts well. She could only say things like, it was interesting. But Tsukumo would read between the lines and put it into words for her. And she would just nod along with, yeah. That was so fun. And then, on the first day of summer vacation, the two started hanging out together. The girl borrowed manga from Tsukumo quite often. Tsukumo also never minded lending his own manga to her. Now, when Tsukumo asked her opinion on a manga she had just finished reading, she could give a fairly lengthy comment beyond just interesting, or yeah. Tsukumo began to feel that chatting with the girl had been very enjoyable lately. The girl was stunned, asking if what Tsukumo had just said was really serious. Tsukumo confirmed it with a smile. Talking about things they liked with friends was the most enjoyable activity for Tsukumo. The girl was quite stunned when Tsukumo considered her a friend. Seeing the girl's reaction, Tsukumo again questioned whether his assumption was wrong about them being friends. The girl was at a loss to explain. She didn't quite understand. The girl wanted to know if it was okay if he called their relationship a friendship. The girl had never heard that before. Tsukumo then asked again with a smile directly to Ninome Mao. Would the girl be willing to be Tsukumo's friend? The girl was then overcome with a feeling of emotion that made her unconsciously shed tears. Tsukumo was quite panicked, worried that he had unknowingly made the girl feel protected. The girl then explained to reassure Tsukumo that neither of them had done anything wrong. All that was wrong was that the girl had a strange nature and attitude. The girl said goodbye to go home. Before leaving, Tsukumo then lent her a book that he thought she might want to read. The manga was Shiryuden Volume 2. Although happy, the girl was worried that she wouldn't be able to return the book on time. Tsukumo didn't feel worried. He was even willing if the book was returned later after summer vacation. The two high school students then parted ways. The girl looked at the book she was holding and found a piece of paper tucked inside. The girl looked quite surprised when she saw the sentence written on the piece of paper. Back to college. Tsukumo remembered that after their last summer vacation in high school, the girl never showed up again. Of course, it was normal because of Yoshida's family situation, where her mother decided to remarry. That was the reason why Yoshida had to move again, and the family name was different from before. Yoshida initially apologized for not being able to contact Tsukumo, but eventually the girl corrected her way of speaking. It wasn't that she couldn't contact Tsukumo. Yoshida just didn't have enough courage to say goodbye to him. Yoshida was surprised when she found Tsukumo at university. Yoshida then got angry. Tsukumo was shocked. He asked why Yoshida was angry. Yoshida said honestly that the thing that made her angry was because at that time Yoshida could immediately recognize Tsukumo at first glance, while Tsukumo didn't recognize the girl at all. Tsukumo then realized his mistake. But he also couldn't do much. He didn't recognize the girl because Yoshida had changed a lot since the last time he saw her in high school. Not only in appearance, the girl's family name had also changed. Meanwhile, according to Yoshida, Tsukumo hadn't changed at all. Tsukumo felt a little uneasy about whether Yoshida's words meant that Tsukumo hadn't grown at all. Yoshida immediately denied it. Nevertheless, the girl was still happy that Tsukumo was still the same Tsukumo. Tsukumo tried to understand. Despite everything that had happened, Tsukumo still considered what happened to them an extraordinary coincidence. How could it not be? What if they hadn't picked up the same boom that day? Slightly embarrassed, Yoshida said that at that time, it was indeed an action she did intentionally. Tsukumo was surprised. Yoshida then began to explain. Because Tsukumo still hadn't noticed Yoshida after all that time, Yoshida wanted to create some kind of opportunity. Yoshida also left other books Tsukumo had lent Yoshida on her bed. Yoshida scattered various hints here and there. But unfortunately, Tsukumo realized it too late. Tsukumo could only apologize to Yoshida for that. Yoshida then asked Tsukumo again. The girl remembered that Tsukumo called her a friend before. Yoshida wanted to know how Tsukumo felt about Yoshida now. Did the young man still think of Yoshida as a friend? Tsukumo was a little confused to answer. But what was certain was that he said he didn't think friends usually do that kind of thing. Yoshida didn't know about it because she didn't have any other friends. Yoshida wanted to know if it was okay to have a friend like that. And after that, it was still the same. Yoshida and Tsukumo became friends again. Unlike before, this time Tsukumo and Yoshida were open about their relationship as friends at university. They didn't hide their closeness. Even Tsukumo's friends noticed it. His friend was even suspicious and asked if Tsukumo and Yoshida were dating. Tsukumo smiled. He then answered that he and Yoshida were just friends. Tsukumo said this as if asking for confirmation from Yoshida. The girl flinched and looked away from Tsukumo, not answering and pretending not to hear anything. Tsukumo smiled, asking if Yoshida was embarrassed by it. Yoshida then shouted for Tsukumo to be quiet. The young man laughed and apologized. He wanted to make sure that they weren't hiding their friendship. Tsukumo's friend, who was still there, saw that the two seemed quiet, even very close. Yoshida then whispered to Tsukumo that if Tsukumo said any more than no sexual stuff for a week. Days had passed since Tsukumo finally remembered Yoshida. Now they were almost at the end of the year. Tsukumo wanted to know if Yoshida had any plans for Christmas. Yoshida hadn't thought of any plans, nor had she intended to go home to her family. Tsukumo didn't have any special plans either. He had only been asked to return home on the 30th for the big cleanup. Tsukumo thought it would be better to spend Christmas with Yoshida. Yoshida didn't mind. In fact, she thought Tsukumo should have told her that from the start. Yoshida said that she couldn't possibly refuse Tsukumo's invitation, but only Yoshida could hear her. Tsukumo wasn't allowed to hear what she had just said. Yoshida told Tsukumo that she didn't really understand what made Christmas so special. Christmas had always been a regular thing in her family, and since her mother remarried, her mother had always spent time out with her husband every year. Yoshida then remembered one special thing she did. It was borrowing a DVD and watching it in the living room as soon as her parents left. Yoshida's mother had always hated anime, so she always watched it only on her phone. Watching it on a big screen really made it feel different. Hearing Yoshida's story, Tsukumo then suggested that they watch anime together on Christmas. They could also have chicken and cake. Tsukumo remembered that Yoshida liked Japanese sweets, so they would rather have Japanese pancakes than cake. On Christmas Day, when the food and sweets were finished, Yoshida made Tsukumo's lips as dessert. Both could still taste the sweets on each other's mouths. Yoshida began to unbutton her shirt one by one. Because the air was so cold, the girl seemed unable to hold back a sneeze. Tsukumo, who tried to understand, wanted to increase the temperature of the air conditioner, but Yoshida stopped him. Yoshida felt okay with the temperature because she knew she would get better and warm again with Tsukumo's body heat. Tsukumo was quite tempted. Yoshida then asked the young man to take off his clothes too. Christmas Eve, which is synonymous with cold air, was spent so warmly, even heated by the passion of the two friends. Various positions were tried to make the girl feel comfortable, but Yoshida at that time wanted to do it while looking at Tsukumo's face. Tsukumo granted Yoshida's request. Soon after, the two reached their peak. Afterward, they went out together. Tsukumo asked if it would be better if they waited until the next day, but Yoshida couldn't wait. She wanted to read it that very day. She was so focused on deciding which anime to watch with Tsukumo that she forgot the new releases were coming out. Yoshida told Tsukumo that he didn't have to go out with her if he didn't need to buy anything. It was fine with Tsukumo. He just wanted to spend as much time as possible with Yoshida on Christmas. Yoshida blushed at Tsukumo's words. She warned him not to say things like that so casually. Tsukumo laughed. He then told Yoshida that he had read Plato. The young man was wondering what Yoshida was trying to say before. But even after he finished reading, Tsukumo still didn't understand what Yoshida was trying to say back then. Yoshida thought it was okay. Tsukumo didn't need to understand it. Tsukumo then begged Yoshida to explain what she meant. Tsukumo had been trying to find out for a while, but still didn't get what she meant. Yoshida said that it wasn't worth talking about. Yoshida just thought about something after reading that. Tsukumo kept begging until Yoshida finally told him. There was a story in the book about hermaphroditic humans. Long ago, there were humans with 2 heads and 4 arms and legs. Those humans had immense power and tried to overthrow God. Angered, the god tore the humans in 2, and the hermaphroditic humans were split into men and women. Men and women fell in love because they were searching for the halves that were once torn apart. But Yoshida thinks the god could have split everyone perfectly in half. Some might have been split unevenly, like 60 to 40 or 70 to 30 or something. Tsukumo then argues that even so, they're God, so they would be able to do it perfectly. What Tsukumo said is exactly what Yoshida thought. In essence, Yoshida thinks that the couples that add up to 100, maybe they're the halves of a body that were torn apart long ago. Tsukumo then thinks back to the ratio of adding up to 100. The young man wonders what it would be like for him and Yoshida. Tsukumo then remembers his memory from when he was in junior high school. When the two of them were discussing their names, they had said that their names would be if it added up to exactly 100. Tsukumo just realized what Yoshida meant. Truly, to Yoshida, Tsukumo was really slow and insensitive. The girl quickened her pace because she felt like the bookstore might be closing soon. Tsukumo still followed her hurriedly. Yoshida, the girl then stretched out her hand for Tsukumo to hold.